Welcome to ZenLight 8, your go-to place for heartfelt stories and life lessons to help you live more fully every day. Today, we're diving into a powerful story from an 82-year-old woman who made a choice she thought was right, moving into a nursing home, only to regret it deeply. Ever wondered what life in a nursing home is really like? Not the promises of safety and comfort, but the raw truth behind those doors. In this video, we're uncovering 6 hard-earned lessons she wishes someone had shared with her before it was too late. If you or a loved one are thinking about this option, stick around until the end, because what you're about to hear might completely change how you see your future. Regret 1: losing my independence. At 82, I've lived through enough to know that life is a series of choices, some small, some monumental, and the consequences of those choices don't always reveal themselves until it's too late to turn back. When I decided to move into a nursing home, I thought I was making a practical decision. My family thought so too. They painted a picture of a place where I'd be cared for, where I wouldn't have to worry about the little things anymore, where I could finally rest after a long life. It sounded reasonable, safe even, but the moment I stepped through those doors and settled into that unfamiliar room, I realized something I hadn't expected. I'd lost control over my own life. That's the first regret I want to share with you, losing my independence, and it hit me harder than anything else. Before I moved in, my days were my own. They weren't perfect, mind you. My knees creaked when I climbed the stairs, and some mornings I'd forget where I'd left my glasses. But those days belonged to me. I decided when to wake up, sometimes at dawn to catch the sunrise, sometimes later if I'd stayed up reading a good book. I chose what to eat, even if it was just toast with a smear of jam, because that's what I felt like. If I wanted to take a walk, I'd grab my coat, step outside, and feel the breeze on my face whenever the mood struck. My home wasn't fancy, but it was mine. A little sanctuary built from years of routines and comforts I'd carved out for myself. My favorite chair by the window, the shelves lined with books I'd collected over decades, the kitchen where I'd hum while stirring a pot of soup. All of it was an extension of me. Then came the nursing home. I'd been told it would be easier. You won't have to worry about cooking or cleaning, my daughter said. Someone will always be there if you need help, my son added. I nodded, picturing a life where I could relax and let others take the reins for a while. But the reality was nothing like that. The first morning, I woke up in a bed that didn't feel like mine. Stiff sheets, a thin mattress, no familiar dip where my body had settled over the years. I stretched, reached for the book I'd been reading back home, and then it hit me. It wasn't there. Neither was my nightstand, my lamp, or the quiet hum of my own space. The room was small, sterile, with pale walls and a single window that didn't even face the sunrise. I sat there, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, and felt a pang I couldn't name yet. It wasn't just the room, though. It was everything that came with it. Breakfast was at 8 a.m. sharp, whether I was hungry or not. If I wanted eggs instead of oatmeal, well, that wasn't an option unless I'd spoken up days in advance. Lights out at 10 p.m., even if I wasn't tired or wanted to finish a chapter. Want to step outside for some fresh air? You'd better hope someone's available to walk with you, because going alone wasn't allowed. Not with my condition, they said, though I'd been managing just fine at home. Every part of my day was dictated by a schedule I didn't create, enforced by people I didn't choose. It was like someone had taken the steering wheel of my life and locked me in the back seat. I remember one afternoon, maybe a week after I'd moved in, when I wanted to take a walk. Back home, I'd stroll around my yard, maybe pull a few weeds or just sit on the porch with a cup of tea. Here I had to press a button and wait. A nurse came eventually, cheerful but busy, and said, "Let's make it quick. Okay? I've got others to check on." We shuffled down a hallway, past identical doors and faded artwork, until we reached a small courtyard. I stood there, breathing in air that didn't feel free, and realized this wasn't a walk. It was a task on someone else's checklist. I went back inside feeling smaller than when I'd started. That's when it sank in. My independence wasn't just about where I lived. It was about the little choices that made me who I was. Deciding to wear my blue sweater because it felt cozy. Cooking a pot of soup even if it took an hour, just because I liked the smell. picking up a book at midnight if sleep wouldn't come. In the nursing home, those choices became privileges I had to earn or beg for. My routines, the ones that had kept me grounded for decades, were replaced by someone else's system. Breakfast at 8, meds at 9, activities at 10 whether I cared for bingo or not. It wasn't my life anymore, it was theirs. The hardest part? Realizing how quickly you adapt or give up. First, I fought it. I'd ask for tea instead of the watery coffee they served, or try to stay up past lights out with a flashlight I'd smuggled in. But the staff would smile patiently and say, "This is how it works here," or "We're just keeping you safe." After a while, you stop asking. You stop arguing when they bring you oatmeal you don't want. You stop asking to go outside when the answer's always maybe later. You learn to fit into their rhythm because fighting takes energy you don't have anymore. And in that surrender, you lose something deeper. A piece of yourself you didn't even know was slipping away until it was gone. I saw it in the other residents too. There was a woman named Margaret, 79, who'd been a gardener her whole life. At home, she'd spend hours tending her roses, her hands rough from soil and love. Here, she sat by the window, staring at a patch of grass she couldn't touch. "I used to decide when to plant," she told me once, her voice quiet. "Now I don't even decide when to eat." Her spark faded a little more each day, and I felt mine dimming too. We weren't people with lives anymore, we were names on a roster, bodies to be managed. If I'd known how much independence I'd lose, I'd have fought harder to stay home. I'd have told my family, "Let's figure this out another way." Maybe hired help for a few hours a day, or moved in with my daughter instead. Anything to keep that sense of control. Because once it's gone, getting it back feels impossible. The longer you're in a place like that, the more you forget what it's like to choose for yourself. You start believing this is all there is. Scheduled meals, permission slips for fresh air. A life that's no longer yours. I think about my first night there often. I lay in that strange bed, listening to the hum of a building I didn't belong in, and felt a hollow ache. My books were gone, packed away or donated because "There's no room for all that here," my son had said. My chair, the one I'd sat in for years watching the world go by, was probably in some stranger's house now. The little comforts I'd built over a lifetime gone. In their place was a routine I didn't ask for, a life I didn't recognize. I wasn't in charge anymore, and that realization was a weight I carried every day. If you're reading this and thinking about a nursing home, for yourself or someone you love, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, are you ready to give up the small freedoms that make life yours? The freedom to wake up when you want, to eat what you crave, to step outside just because you can? Because once those are gone, you'll miss them more than you ever imagined. I didn't think I'd care so much about losing control over my mornings or my meals, but I did. I do. It's not just about convenience, it's about identity, about holding on to the person you've spent a lifetime becoming. I'm not saying nursing homes don't have their place. For some, they're a necessity, a lifeline when no other options remain. But for me, it was a choice I made too quickly, trusting the promises without seeing the cost. If I could go back, I'd cling to my independence with everything I had. I'd find a way to make it work at home, to keep that spark of self alive. Because once you hand over the reins, you don't just lose your routines, you lose a piece of your soul. And that's a regret I'll carry for the rest of my days. Regret too, feeling forgotten. When I made the decision to move into the nursing home, I didn't just pack up my belongings. I packed up a lifetime of trust in the people I loved most. My family was part of that decision, you see. They sat with me around the kitchen table, their voices soft but certain, promising me a future where I'd never feel alone. "We'll visit all the time," my daughter said, squeezing my hand. "You'll see the grandkids every weekend," my son added with a smile. I believed them. Why wouldn't I? They were my lifeline, the ones who'd always been there through thick and thin. But once I settled into that nursing home, the second regret hit me like a slow, creeping tide, the feeling of being forgotten. It's a loneliness I never saw coming, and it's one of the hardest truths I've had to face. In the beginning, it wasn't so bad. The first week, my daughter came by with a bouquet of daisies, my favorite, and we sat in the common room, chatting about her work and the kids. My grandchildren popped in that weekend, their laughter filling the sterile hallways as they showed me pictures from school. For a little while, it felt like I was still part of their world. I'd sit by the window after they left, replaying those moments, holding onto the warmth of their voices. I told myself, this will work. They'll keep coming. I'm still in their lives. But as the weeks turned into months, something shifted. The visits slowed. The phone calls grew shorter. And that's when I started to feel it. The quiet, gnawing sense that I was slipping out of sight. It wasn't sudden, mind you. It was gradual, like watching a photograph fade in the sun. My daughter's weekly visits turned into every other week, then once a month. She'd call instead. Her voice rushed, saying, "Mom, I'm swamped with work, but I'll come soon, I promise." The grandkids stopped showing up altogether, school projects, sports, friends, all the things that fill a young life. I understood. I didn't want to be the nagging grandmother, the one who guilt them into stopping by. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. Holidays were the worst. They'd say, "We'll be there for Christmas," or "Thanksgiving at the nursing home this year." But then plans would change. Someone got sick, the weather turned, or life just got in the way. I'd sit in the common room, watching the door, pretending I wasn't waiting, while other residents did the same. We were all hoping today might be the day someone remembered. I don't blame my family, not really. They didn't stop loving me. I know that in my heart. But when you're not there every day, when you're not at the dinner table or in the living room for movie night, it's easy to fade into the background. Out of sight, out of mind. That's what they say, and I never realized how true it was until I lived it. They'd assume I was fine, that the nursing home was taking care of me, that I didn't need them as much anymore. But the truth is, I needed them more than ever. Not just for company, but to feel like I still mattered, like I was still part of the world they were living in. One evening stands out in my memory. It was a Friday, maybe 6 months after I'd moved in. I'd had a rough day, nothing big, just the usual ache of missing home. And I sat in my room, holding my phone. I wanted to call my son. I wanted to hear his voice, to ask how his day went, to tell him I missed him. But my finger hovered over the button, and I couldn't press it. What if he was busy? What if he sighed and said, "Mom, can we talk later?" I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be the old woman who begged for attention. So I put the phone down and stared at the wall instead. That's when it hit me. This was my life now. Waiting, hoping, wondering if anyone would think of me without me having to ask. The loneliness wasn't just about my family, though. It was the whole world outside those walls. Back home, I'd had neighbors who'd wave as I watered my plants, friends who'd call to check in, even the mailman who'd chat about the weather. Those little threads tied me to something bigger. In the nursing home, those threads unraveled. No one knew me here, not really. The staff were kind enough, but they were busy, moving from room to room, their smiles professional but fleeting. The other residents were in their own worlds, some too frail or too lost in their minds to connect. I'd sit in the common room sometimes, watching TV with people I barely knew, and feel like a ghost. The world kept spinning out there. Birthdays, graduations, sunny days at the park, and I wasn't part of it anymore. I saw it happen to others too. There was a man named Henry, 85, who'd been a teacher for 40 years. He'd light up when he talked about his students, how they'd send him cards every Christmas. But after he moved in, those cards stopped coming. "They don't know where I am now," he said one day, his voice cracking. "Or maybe they just forgot." He'd sit by the window, holding an old photo of his classroom, and I'd see the same emptiness in his eyes that I felt in my chest. We weren't just forgotten by our families, we were forgotten by the lives we'd built. The hardest part was how it changed me. I used to be the one who hosted dinners, who called friends to catch up, who never let a birthday slip by unnoticed. Now I was the one waiting to be remembered. I'd catch myself staring at the door, hoping for a familiar face, and then feel foolish for hoping at all. The longer it went on, the more I withdrew. Why reach out if no one reached back? Why keep trying when the silence told me everything I needed to know? I started to feel like a shadow of myself, A woman whose life had once been full but was now reduced to a name on a visitor log that rarely got signed. If I'd known how deep this loneliness would cut, I'd have thought twice about moving in. I'd have asked my family, "Are you sure you'll be there? Can you promise I won't fade away?" Maybe I'd have stayed home, found a way to keep those connections alive. Neighbors checking in, friends dropping by, family close enough to touch. Because once you're in a nursing home, it's not just the walls that separate you from the world. It's the way life moves on without you. You become a memory, a duty, a "we'll get to it later" that never comes. I think about those early promises often. "We'll visit all the time. You won't be alone." They meant it when they said it. I believe that. But intentions don't fill empty days. They don't warm a quiet room or stop the ache of watching the door stay still. If you're considering a nursing home, for yourself or someone you love, ask this. Are you prepared for the loneliness that creeps in when the visits stop? Because no matter how much your family cares, once you're out of their daily lives, it's easier than you think to slip from their minds. I wasn't ready for that. I don't think anyone ever is. Looking back, I wish I'd fought harder to stay connected. I wish I'd said, "If I go, don't let me disappear," because that's what happened. I disappeared, not all at once, but bit by bit, until I was just a voice on the phone they didn't always answer. The nursing home didn't just take my independence, it took my place in the world. And that feeling of being forgotten is a weight I carry every day, heavier than I ever imagined it could be. Regret 3, losing my sense of purpose. When I agreed to move into the nursing home, I thought I was just changing my address, swapping my little house with its creaky floors for a room with clean walls and round-the-clock care. I didn't realize I was also giving up something far more precious. The reason I got out of bed each morning. Back home, life wasn't grand or glamorous, but it had purpose. Small things, watering the plants, brewing a pot of coffee, tidying up my kitchen, gave me a rhythm, a sense of meaning that kept me going. In the nursing home, all of that vanished, and the third regret settled in, losing my sense of purpose. It's a void I didn't expect, and it turned my days into something long, empty, and unrecognizable. At home, every day had its own quiet magic. I'd wake up, sometimes early, sometimes not, and shuffle to the kitchen in my slippers. I'd fill the kettle, listen to it hum as the water heated, and breathe in the rich smell of coffee grounds as I scooped them into the pot. It wasn't just coffee, it was a ritual, a little act of care I gave myself. Then I'd step outside, watering can in hand, and check on my plants. The geraniums by the porch needed a trim. The basil in the window box begged for a drink. I talked to them sometimes, silly as that sounds, coaxing them to grow. Afterward, I'd sweep the floor or dust the shelves, not because anyone was coming over, but because it felt good to keep my space mine. Those tasks weren't chores, they were threads in the fabric of my life, proof I was still here, still contributing, still alive. The nursing home took all of that away. I didn't see it coming, not at first. When I moved in, they told me, "You don't have to worry about a thing anymore. Meals would be made for me. Someone else would clean. No more fussing with plants or pots or brooms." At the time, it sounded like a relief. I'd spent decades taking care of others. My husband, my kids, my home, and the idea of resting felt earned. But a few days in, I noticed something was off. Breakfast arrived on a tray at 8 a.m., cooked by hands I didn't know, tasting of nothing I'd have chosen. The room stayed spotless without me lifting a finger. There were no plants to water, no coffee to brew, no little messes to tidy. At first, I told myself, this is nice. No responsibilities. Just relax. But then the days stretched out, and I realized relaxation wasn't the gift I'd thought it would be. It was a vacuum. Without those small acts, I didn't know what to do with myself. Back home, I'd had a reason to get up, even if it was just to boil water or pull a weed. Here, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for someone to tell me what came next. Breakfast at 8, meds at 9, maybe a group activity at 10, bingo or a sing-along I didn't care for. The hours between dragged like years. I'd sit by the window, watching clouds drift, with nothing to fill the silence. The staff would bustle by, cheerful but distant. And I'd think, what am I here for? I wasn't tending to anything, creating anything, or even keeping myself going. I was just there waiting for time to pass. It wasn't just me. I saw it in the others too. There was George, 84, a carpenter who'd spent his life building things. Tables, chairs, little birdhouses for his grandkids. He'd walk into the nursing home with stories of his workshop, his hands still calloused from years of work. But here, those hands sat idle in his lap. No tools, no wood, no projects. I feel useless, he told me one day, his voice low, eyes fixed on the floor. I knew exactly what he meant. He'd lost the thing that made him George, not just his craft, but the purpose it gave him. Day by day, I watched him shrink, his energy fading as he stared at walls that held no meaning for him. The same thing was happening to me, and I couldn't stop it. The days felt endless because they were empty. At home, even the smallest task had a point. Wiping down the counter meant I'd eat on a clean surface. Watering the plants meant they'd bloom another day. Here, nothing I did mattered. The meals came whether I wanted them or not. The room stayed neat without my help. There was no outcome tied to my actions, no reward for my effort because there was no effort to give. I tried to find something, knitting, maybe, or reading, but even those felt hollow. The yarn was provided by the staff, the books were from a shared shelf, and none of it was mine to shape or claim. Purpose isn't just about filling time. It's about feeling like you're part of something, like your presence changes the world, even in the tiniest way. In the nursing home, I stopped changing anything. I remember one afternoon, sitting in the common room with a dozen other residents. The TV blared some game show no one was watching. A woman across from me, Clara, 80, stared at her hands, twisting a tissue into knots. I used to bake, she said suddenly, like she needed to say it out loud. Every Sunday, pies for the family. Now what? Her voice broke, and I didn't have an answer. I thought of my coffee pot, my plants, the way I'd hum while scrubbing a dish. We'd all had something, some little spark that kept us going, and it was gone. The staff tried to help, bless them. They'd roll out craft tables or play music, but it wasn't the same. Purpose isn't handed to you on a schedule, it grows from within, from the things you choose, the things you love. Without that, we were just bodies in chairs, waiting for the next tray of food. The mind slows down when there's no purpose. The body follows. I noticed it in myself. I'd sit longer, move less, think less. What was there to think about? No plans to make, no tasks to finish. I'd catch myself drifting, staring at nothing, and hours would slip by. It wasn't restful, it was numbing. I'd see George in his corner, Clara with her tissue, and know they felt it too. We were fading, not because we were old, but because we'd lost the why behind our days. At home, I'd been tired sometimes. Sure, but I'd been alive. Here, I was resting myself into oblivion. If I'd known how much purpose mattered, I'd have clung to it with everything I had. I'd have told my family, find a way to keep me home. Let me water my plants, make my messes, live my life. Because once it's gone, finding it again isn't easy. The nursing home didn't just take my routines, it took the meaning behind them. I thought I'd enjoy the break, but I didn't. I missed the weight of a watering can in my hand, the steam from a fresh pot of coffee, the satisfaction of a swept floor. Those things weren't burdens, they were lifelines. If you're thinking about a nursing home, for yourself or someone else, ask this. What gives your days meaning? Is it the little rituals, the tasks you do because they're yours? Because once those are gone, you don't just lose time, you lose yourself. I didn't realize how much I'd miss feeling useful, feeling needed, until I was sitting in a room where nothing I did made a difference. Purpose isn't about big achievements. It's about the small, steady acts that remind you who you are. In the nursing home, I forgot who I was, and that's a regret that haunts me still. Looking back, I wish I'd fought to hold on to my spark. I wish I'd said, I'll keep my plants, my coffee, my messes as long as I can, because without them, I'm not sure what's left. The days here stretch on, long and meaningless, and I'm left wondering why I ever thought letting go would set me free. didn't. It just left me empty. Regret 4. Declining health faster than expected. When I walked into the nursing home for the first time, I wasn't exactly spry. I was 82, after all, with knees that groaned and a back that reminded me of every year I'd lived. But I was managing. I could still shuffle to the kitchen, carry a bag of groceries, take a walk around my yard. I wasn't running marathons, but I was holding my own, keeping my body moving in the ways that mattered. That's why the 4th regret blindsided me. My health declined faster than I ever thought possible once I moved in. It wasn't just aging. It was the way the nursing home stripped away my strength, turning me from someone who could fend for herself into someone who struggled to stand. And I wasn't the only one. Back home, I had my routines. They weren't fancy, but they kept me going. Mornings started with a stretch, nothing formal, just reaching for the ceiling to loosen up my joints. I'd walk to the mailbox, maybe circle the block if the weather was nice, feeling the ground under my feet and the air in my lungs. Cooking meant standing at the stove, stirring a pot, lifting a pan, small efforts that added up. Even cleaning, sweeping the porch or wiping down the table, kept my muscles awake. I wasn't a fitness buff, but I was active in my own way, and that activity was the thread holding my health together. I didn't realize how much it mattered until it was gone. The nursing home changed everything. When I moved in, they told me, "You don't have to do anything anymore." Meals would come to me. Help was a button away. No more lugging groceries or scrubbing floors. At first, it felt like a luxury. My daughter said, "Mom, you deserve to rest." And I nodded, thinking maybe she was right. The first few days, I sat back, letting trays arrive, letting staff fetch what I needed. I didn't have to stand in the kitchen or climb stairs. And for a moment, I thought, this is easy. But easy turned into something else. Something I didn't see coming until my legs started to betray me. Started small. I'd get up from a chair and feel a stiffness I hadn't noticed before. My walks, short trips down the hall with a nurse, left me winded when they never had at home. I'd sit more, because why not? There was nothing to do, nowhere to go. The less I moved, the weaker I got. My muscles, the ones I'd kept strong through years of little tasks, began to fade. I'd reach for something, a cup, a book, and my arm would tremble. Getting out of bed became a chore, my legs shaky under my weight. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger, someone friendlier, older, not the woman who'd carried her life on her own 2 feet just months before. I wasn't imagining it. I saw it happen to others too. Alice, 81, came in full of fire. She'd been a walker. Every day, rain or shine, she'd circle her neighborhood, insisting age was just a number. When she arrived, she kept it up, pacing the facility's halls with a stubborn grin. But after a few months, I noticed her slowing. She'd lean on the wall, then a walker appeared. One day, I saw her in a wheelchair, her head bowed. "I don't know when it happened," she told me, her voice thin. "I feel like I aged 10 years overnight." I knew what she meant. It wasn't overnight. It was the days piling up, the sitting, the waiting, the help that made us helpless. The more they did for us, the more we needed them. Meals on trays meant no cooking, no standing, no lifting. Buttons to press meant no walking to get what I wanted. Even bathing, someone would help, and I'd sit there, letting them wash me when I'd scrubbed myself clean for decades. It was convenient, sure, but it was a trap. Every time I let them take over, I lost a little more of what kept me strong. My legs, once steady enough to carry me through a grocery store, now wobbled after a few steps. My arms, which had hauled laundry baskets, struggled with a spoon. I wasn't just resting. I was rusting, and the nursing home was oiling the gears of my decline. I remember one morning, maybe 4 months in, when I tried to stand and couldn't. My knees buckled, and I sank back into the chair, heart pounding. A nurse rushed over, all kindness and efficiency, and said, "Don't worry, we'll get you a walker." A walker. I'd never needed one at home. I climbed my stairs, slow but sure, and now I couldn't even cross a room. She brought it, and I gripped the handles, feeling the cold metal under my palms, and something broke inside me. This wasn't me. This wasn't the woman who danced at her daughter's wedding. who'd chase grandkids around the yard. But it was who I'd become, and I couldn't stop it. The others told the same story. There was Tom, 78, who'd been a mechanic, broad shoulders, hands that could wrench a bolt free. He walked in on his own, head high, but 6 months later, he was in a wheelchair, his legs thin under a blanket. "I didn't use them," he said one day, shrugging. "Guess they gave up." That's what it felt like. Our bodies gave up because we did. The nursing home made it so easy to stop moving, stop trying, that we didn't notice we were losing ourselves until it was too late. People who'd come in upright were rolling out in chairs, and I was one of them. If I'd known how fast I'd fall apart, I'd have fought harder. I'd have told my family, "Keep me home, keep me moving, don't let me sit still." Because movement isn't just about getting around, it's about surviving. At home, I'd pushed myself, up the stairs, out to the garden, into the kitchen, even when I didn't feel like it. Here, there was no push. Everything was handed to me, and I took it, not realizing I was trading my strength for it. I'd see Alice in her wheelchair, Tom with his blanket, and think, "That's me soon." And it terrified me, but I didn't know how to stop it. The longer I stayed, the less I could do, and the less I could do, the more I needed them. It's a vicious cycle. You sit because it's easier. You weaken because you sit. You need help because you're weak, and the help makes you weaker still. I'd lie in bed some nights, feeling my body sink into the mattress, and wonder where my strength had gone. It hadn't left me at home. It left me here, in a place designed to make life effortless but ended up making it fade. I'd think of my walks, my cooking, the way I'd stretch in the morning sun, and ache for them. Those weren't just habits. They were my lifeline, and I'd let them go without a fight. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, will you keep moving when everything's done for you? Because once you slow down, getting back up isn't as simple as you think. I didn't see it coming. How fast my body would betray me, how quickly I'd lose what I'd spent years maintaining. I thought I was resting, but I was unraveling. The nursing home didn't just take my home. It took my health piece by piece until I barely recognized myself. Looking back, I wish I'd held on to my strength. I wish I'd said, "I'll keep walking, keep cooking, keep going as long as I can." Because once it's gone, you don't just miss it, you mourn it. I see Alice, Tom, myself, and I know we didn't have to end up this way, not so soon, not so fast. The nursing home promised ease, but it delivered decline. And that's a regret I'll carry as long as my legs still let me. Regret 5, loss of privacy and dignity. When I decided to move into the nursing home, I knew I'd be giving up some things. My house, my routines, the little freedoms I'd taken for granted. But there was one loss I didn't fully grasp until I was living it. My privacy and dignity. At home, I'd had my own space. A sanctuary where I could close the door and be myself, where the most personal parts of my life stayed mine. In the nursing home, that disappeared, and the 5th regret settled over me like a heavy fog. The constant presence of staff, the need for help with things I'd always done alone, the lack of a space that truly belonged to me. It stripped away not just my solitude, but the core of who I was. I didn't realize how much those things mattered until they were gone. Back home, privacy was a given. I'd wake up in my own bed, surrounded by walls I'd painted, curtains I'd hung, a quiet that felt like mine. If I wanted to sit in silence, I could. If I needed to cry, no one would see. The bathroom was my own, showering, brushing my teeth, all the small acts of care I'd done for decades without a second thought. My bedroom door had a lock. Not that I used it much, but it was there, a symbol of control. I decided who came in, when, and why. That space wasn't just a house. It was an extension of me, a place where I could be unguarded, human, whole. I didn't know how much I'd miss it until I stepped into a world where privacy was a luxury I couldn't afford. The nursing home was different from the start. My room wasn't really mine. It was a shared space, a box with a bed and a curtain if I was lucky. Staff came and went, knocking sometimes but not always waiting for an answer. Just checking in, they'd say, popping their heads through the door, their voices bright but impersonal. I'd be sitting there, maybe still in my nightgown, hair unbrushed, and feel a flush of shame I couldn't shake. I wasn't ready to be seen, but I didn't have a choice. Room checks were part of the routine, morning, afternoon, night, making sure I was okay, but leaving me feeling exposed. Even the quiet moments weren't mine. There was always a hum of footsteps, voices, the clatter of carts outside my door. Then there were the personal things. Things I'd never imagined needing help with. Showering, for one. At home, I'd step into my tub, turn the water just right, and wash myself in peace. In the nursing home, I had to wait for an aide. "Ready for your shower?" they'd ask, and I'd nod, even if I wasn't, because what else could I say? They'd help me undress, guide me to a chair under the spray, and scrub where I couldn't reach. I know they were doing their job and they were kind about it, but it didn't change the fact that I felt bare. Not just my body, but my pride. I'd spent 82 years taking care of myself, and now I was sitting there, wet and helpless, while someone else ran a washcloth over my skin. It wasn't their fault, but it was humiliating all the same. The bathroom was worse. Sometimes I'd press the call button, needing to go, and wait, 5 minutes, 10, longer if they were busy. I'd sit there, trying to hold on, feeling like a child again, dependent on someone else's schedule. When they finally came, they'd help me up, steady me, sometimes even stay while I went. I'd stare at the tiles, avoiding their eyes, wishing I could disappear. I'd always been private about those things. Closed doors, no questions, my business alone. Now it was a public act, a necessity I couldn't control, and every time it happened, I felt a little less like myself. Sharing a room didn't help. I was lucky. My roommate, Ellen, was quiet and kind, a soft-spoken woman who kept to herself. But it wasn't always that way for others. I heard stories. Residents paired with strangers who snored like freight trains, who left messes, who wandered into your side of the room in the night because their minds weren't clear. One woman, Ruth, 83, told me her roommate shouted at shadows till dawn, leaving her sleepless and frayed. "I can't even rest in my own space," she said, her voice trembling. Even with Ellen, I felt the loss. I couldn't talk on the phone without her hearing, couldn't cry without her knowing. My life wasn't mine anymore. It was ours, shared with someone I hadn't chosen. Dignity slipped away in smaller ways too. Meals were a set menu, eat what's served or go hungry. If I didn't like the chicken or the mushy peas, too bad. There was no pantry to rummage through, no stove to cook something else. Staff would talk to me like I was a patient, not a person. "Time for your pills, dear," or "let's get you to bed." Their tones gentle but patronizing. I'd been a wife, a mother, a woman who'd run a household, and now I was dear, a name on a chart. They'd knock and enter, move my things, decide my day, and I'd sit there, shrinking into someone I didn't recognize. It wasn't their fault, they were busy following rules, but it chipped away at me all the same. I remember one day early on, when an aide came in while I was changing. I just pulled my shirt off, standing there in my bra, when the door swung open. "Oh, sorry," she chirped, but she didn't leave, just grabbed a clipboard and started talking about my next appointment. I clutched the shirt to my chest, heat rising in my face, and mumbled something about waiting. She smiled, oblivious, and left, but I sat there for a long time after, feeling raw. At home, no one saw me like that unless I let them. Here, my body, my space, my choices, they weren't mine to guard anymore. Changed me. I started to feel less human, more like a task on someone's list. I'd hear the aides outside, laughing about their day, and realize I wasn't part of that world. The one where people lived, not just existed. I'd look at Ellen, sleeping across the room, and wonder if she felt it too. The way we'd become shadows of ourselves, defined by what we couldn't do alone. The staff didn't mean to take our dignity. They were just doing what the system demanded. But intent didn't soften the blow. I'd spent a lifetime building my sense of self, and in months it was unraveling thread by thread. I saw it in others too. Ruth, with her sleepless nights, stopped smiling after a while. "I'm not a person here," she said once, her eyes hollow. Another man, Paul, 79, used to joke about everything, until he needed help bathing and went quiet. "I feel like a baby," he muttered one day, and I understood. We weren't ourselves anymore, we were residents, numbers, bodies to be managed. The nursing home didn't just take our privacy. It took our pride, and with it, the people we'd been. If I'd known how much I'd lose, I'd have fought to stay home. I'd have told my family, find a way to keep my space mine, my life mine, because once you give up that control, it's hard to get back. I didn't realize how much dignity lived in the quiet of my own room, the freedom to wash my own hair, the right to say not now and have it mean something. Here, those were privileges, not rights, and losing them left me smaller than I'd ever been. If you're thinking about a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready to let go of your privacy, your dignity, the things that make you you? Because once they're gone, you don't just miss them, you grieve them. I didn't see it coming. How exposed I'd feel, how diminished. The nursing home promised care, but it took my self-respect, and that's a regret I'll carry as long as I'm here. Regret 6. Realizing it's harder to leave than you think. When I first walked through the doors of the nursing home, I carried a comforting thought in the back of my mind. This wasn't permanent. I told myself I'd give it a try, see how it felt, and if it didn't work out, I'd just go back home. It was a safety net, a promise I made to myself that kept the decision from feeling too heavy. My family nodded along. If you don't like it, we'll figure something else out, they said. I believed it was that simple. But as the months wore on, the 6th regret crept in, cold and unyielding. Realizing it's harder to leave than you think. What I'd seen as a reversible choice turned into a trap, one built from fading strength, a changing home, and a life that slipped further out of reach every day. At the start, I treated it like an experiment. I'd packed a few bags, left most of my things at home, and told myself, this is temporary. My house was still there, waiting, my chair by the window, my kitchen with its chipped mugs, my garden with its stubborn weeds. I pictured myself returning if I needed to, stepping back into that familiar rhythm as if I'd never left. The nursing home was just a pit stop, a place to rest until I decided otherwise. I'd sit in my new room, listening to the hum of the building, and think, if this gets old, I'll go. It was a lifeline, that thought, a way to keep the door open, to hold on to control. But that door started closing faster than I expected. The first hint came when I mentioned leaving to my daughter, maybe 2 months in. I'd had a rough week. The food was bland, the schedule was suffocating, and I missed my own bed. I think I might go home, I said over the phone, testing the waters. There was a pause, then her voice, careful but firm. Are you sure you can manage, Mom? It's safer where you are. I brushed it off, but the doubt lingered. Safer. That word stuck with me, a quiet nudge that maybe I couldn't handle it anymore. My son chimed in later, we just want what's best for you. And I started to wonder if they saw me differently now, not as the woman who'd raised them, but as someone fragile, someone who needed to stay put. Then there was the house itself. I'd left it empty, thinking I'd be back soon. But empty houses don't wait, they change. My kids had started helping while I was gone, sorting through my things, selling what they thought I wouldn't need. We didn't want it to sit there collecting dust, my daughter explained when I asked about my old radio, the one I'd listened to every morning. It was gone, along with half my books and that chair I loved. They'd even talked about renting the place out. It's practical, Mom, with you not there. Practical. My home, the one I'd built my life in, was slipping away, piece by piece, and I wasn't there to stop it. The idea of going back felt less real when back wasn't the same anymore. My body didn't help either. I'd been strong enough when I moved in, slow, sure, but capable. I could cook, climb stairs, tend my garden. But the nursing home wore me down fast. Sitting all day, relying on trays and aids, my legs weakened, my arms softened. I tried to stand and feel the tremble, the way my knees buckled if I pushed too hard. One day, I dropped a cup, something I'd have caught at home, and watched it roll across the floor, my hands too slow to grab it. I wasn't the same woman who'd packed those bags. The longer I stayed, the less I could do, and the less I could do, the harder it was to imagine living alone again. I'd lie awake at night, picturing my house, and wonder, could I even manage the stairs now? The family pressure grew too. Every time I brought up leaving, the response was the same. Are you sure? Wouldn't it be better to stay? We'd worry about you on your own. They didn't mean to cage me. I know they loved me, but their words built walls. I didn't want to be a burden, didn't want them pacing their floors at night, imagining me falling or forgetting my pills. So I'd nod, say, maybe you're right, and let the idea fade. But it wasn't just their doubt, it was mine. The nursing home had chipped away at my confidence, made me question if I could still be the woman who'd lived alone for years. Fear crept in and it kept me stuck. I saw it in others too. There was Mary, 80, who'd moved in just for a while after a fall. She'd talk about her apartment, how she'd left her cat with a neighbor, how she'd go back once she was steady. But months passed, her apartment was let go. Her cat found a new home, and her strength didn't return. I thought I'd leave, she said one day, her voice hollow. Now I don't know where I'd go. Another man, Frank, 77, had planned to try it for the summer. His house was sold by fall. His kids convinced him it was for the best, and he stopped talking about leaving. The nursing home didn't just hold us. It swallowed us, turning a temporary stay into a life sentence. The longer I stayed, the more it became my world. The outside faded. My street, my neighbors, the sound of birds in my yard. Here it was hallways, trays, the same faces day after day. I'd sit in the common room, watching TV I didn't care about, and realize this was it. My life shrunk to these walls. The idea of leaving felt like a dream, something I'd once believed but couldn't touch anymore. My house was gone. My strength was fading. My family was settled into this new normal. I think about packing a bag, walking out, but where would I go? How would I manage? The barriers, financial, physical, emotional, piled up, and I didn't have the fight to climb them. I remember one night, staring at the ceiling. When it hit me, I wasn't getting out. Not because they wouldn't let me, but because I couldn't. My home wasn't mine anymore. My body wasn't strong enough. My family saw me as someone who belonged here. I told myself it was temporary, but I'd settled in, let the roots grow, and now they were too deep to pull up. The nursing home had become my whole world, not by choice, but by default. The life I'd known, the one with my garden, my mugs, my freedom, was a memory, and I didn't know how to get it back. If I'd known how hard it would be to leave, I'd have fought from the start. I'd have said, keep my house, keep me strong, don't let me settle, because once you're in, the way out closes behind you. I didn't see the costs, the sold furniture, the weakened legs, the quiet pressure to stay, until they were too big to undo. The nursing home didn't just take my present. It took my future, locking me into a life I hadn't meant to choose. If you're considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you ready for it to become permanent? Because once you're in, leaving isn't as simple as packing a bag. Your home changes, your body weakens, your world shrinks, and before you know it, there's no going back. I thought I could walk away anytime. I was wrong. The nursing home didn't just house me. It claimed me, and that's a regret I'll live with as long as I'm here. Looking back on my 82 years, I don't regret growing old. Aging is a gift not everyone gets. What I do regret is believing a nursing home was the only path forward when I still had so much life to live. I walked through those doors expecting comfort, safety, maybe even a little peace. Instead, I found a world that took more than it gave. My independence, my connection to loved ones, my sense of purpose, my health, my privacy, and my freedom to choose. It wasn't all bad. Some need the care it provides, and I see that. But for me, it was a trade I didn't fully understand until I'd lost what mattered most. If I could turn back time, I'd have fought harder to stay in my own home, to hold on to the routines and dignity that defined me, to keep my place in the world I'd built. This journey taught me something I want to pass on to you. The life you have right now, your morning coffee, your quiet moments, your ability to decide, is worth more than you might realize. If you're facing this choice, for yourself or someone you love, don't rush it. Ask the hard questions. Weigh what you're giving up against what you'll gain. Because once you step into that world, it's not just a move. It's a transformation, and it's tougher to undo than you think. I wish I'd known that. I hope you do. To everyone watching on ZenLight 8, thank you for joining me on this journey. Sharing these 6 regrets hasn't been easy, but knowing you're here, listening, makes it worthwhile. Your presence, your comments, your likes, your shares, keeps this channel alive and inspires us to keep bringing you stories that matter. I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with one thing you've learned from this video and how you might use it in your life. Your thoughts fuel us, and reading them lights up my day more than you know. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's next. Sharing this with someone you care about could make a difference in their life too. Thanks for being part of Zenlight 8. We're a community here, and I'm grateful for every one of you. Until next time, take care, and hold tight to the things that make your life yours.